con.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. Sorry. If you see a link down below, it's to the Zoom area. You can actually participate in this if you're watching on YouTube and ask questions and be part of the conversation. So join us if you dare. If you're here in Zoom and this is the first time you've come into it, you may be wondering, how are some of the people in the attendees and some of the people in the panel? Well, the attendees got here. I mean, the panelists got here early. So we start doing tests at 6:40. We open the doors at 6 o'clock. Between 6 and 6:30, I can't promise anything. Sometimes it's a great technical conversation. Sometimes it's just a great conversation. But I'm not going to promise anything. We just kind of wander about. We have our coffee and tea and kind of get started. Between 6:30 and 6:40, we hand out the Discord link. The Discord link is where almost 700 of us are hanging out and talking between these shows. And then at 6:40 to 6:45, we start the mic checks. Once we've started the mic checks, we're not going to add any more panelists. So definitely get in early. Make sure you've got good audio, video, and internet. And you're more than welcome to join the panel, especially if you disagree with us. You think that we aren't saying what we should say or not saying enough or we're not covering something correctly, well, then throwing the gauntlet down for you. So you should come in, you should join us and become part of that conversation. At 7 o'clock, from 7 to 8, we do an open question. So this can be any question related to media production. And we will post in here. You'll see there's a chat tool that we're using that's external to Zoom. And so you can go in there and ask questions there. So you'll see a link in the chat room here. That's really where we're watching both comments and questions. There's a whole chat function in there as well as Q&A. So definitely check that out. We'd love to, there's a great chat going on there as well as being able to ask questions, vote those questions up and down. You are truly, as an attendee, driving the conversation. This is really a show that's built by all of us. So what you vote on, what you ask, and then what drives what we talk about. It's a different kind of show, So then probably anything, if you're new to this, it's probably than anything you've seen before, and probably anything, unlike anything we see anywhere else. So so it really is up to you as an attendee to keep feeding us questions and voting those questions up and help guiding the conversation along. Second hour, we generally have something that we're going to talk about specifically, either a specific subject or a specific group of subjects. Monday is typically a wild card. This Monday, we're talking about AWS. We're going to have an introduction to AWS from the team there. Tuesday is audio. So we talk specifically about audio. Wednesday is cameras and video. Thursdays is a special guest. Tomorrow, we're going to have Shauna Carner, who is a journalist. She worked for Channel 4 in the UK as well as Financial Times. She's traveled all over the world. And she's going to talk about her process. Friday is education. And then Saturday, we're also going to have education from 9 until we've run out of questions. And so we're really spending a lot of time on education right now. If you have friends that are teachers or in education, we definitely recommend both Friday and Saturday for them to come in. Today, we're going to be talking about, in our second hour, we're going to talk about all the new cameras, including the Sony A7S 2 or 3 that has been leaking out. So Chris Summers will be managing that conversation, and we'll be talking about that in the second hour. So that's kind of how it all works, and we'll go ahead and start with the questions. Chris, what do we got?
Good morning, Alex. First question comes from Random Com. Interesting. Alex, you mentioned hot failover of encoders. Well, in software, HA via cluster failover is well understood. How do you typically accomplish this in hardware?
So, typically how we handle failovers is we have two. When we're doing live streaming, we'll typically almost always have two encoders. So we've got two hardware encoders. Our hardware encoder of choice is our Elementals. That's pretty much what all we've used in the last decade. So I didn't realize how outlandish that was when we started, because it was someone at Elemental. I was talking to them and they were like, yeah, you were like the fifth customer. I was like, the fifth customer? I thought you've been around for a decade. And so anyway, so we've been using Elementals for a long time, but there's lots of other encoders that you can use. Basically what we have is we have two pieces of hardware on two different power supplies with two different UPSs, or two different power sources, two different UPSs. Those go with two different paths out of the building to two different ISPs to two different ingest points on whatever CDN that we're working with. And we generally try to avoid CDNs that don't have primary and backup connection when we can. So then we have those two set up, and they're getting the same video but sending it out in a completely diverse path, or as diverse as we can make it. Sometimes you can't get all of those things, but that's what we're trying to do. With the elementals, we do what's called a output locking, which is one elemental looks at the other one and make sure that frame by frame it's exactly the same. It's sending everything out at exactly the same time. And so because of that, it makes it easier for the CDN to jump from one to the other if it loses signal for whatever reason. So, and that signal, that can be a lot of different things. An ingest point can actually break in the CDN. That's why you always want to stream to, even if you only have one encoder, you always want to stream to both ingest, because there could be something, there has been for us, something on the other end where one ingest point isn't working and the other one is. There's some kind of congestion and so on and so forth. So we send those out anyway. And then basically we try to force it at the very beginning to make sure it's on our primary encoder, but it doesn't always happen that way. One thing you have to know is that what CDN is being, or what ingest is being used, is up to the player. So if the player is seeing more health, or you can end up with half the people watching your event on the primary and half on the backup. So it's not like, oh, until it really breaks, everybody's on the primary. So it's important, because we didn't know that at first, and we would have a satellite or fiber on the primary and then a live view on the back end going, oh, well, it'll fall over if this falls apart. But that's actually not the case. They could end up with half your people watching off the live view. So you have to be kind of careful of that. But that's a pretty hopefully a detailed answer to that question. Let's go to the next one.
Stuart Fairweather says, following the pre-show chat, what's the preferred method for monitoring the stream as it appears to the viewers? Stuart actually says his is to use a phone hotspot on a separate telco connection, watching on a laptop by the comment moderator.
For larger events, for smaller events, we try to look at it on both mobile and desktop as far as what the viewer is going to do. We have another window open, another computer that's looking at it. For a larger event, we basically have a workstation area, which is every device we can think of that would be possibly hitting that on different. We'll be looking at it in Chrome, Firefox, Safari, sometimes Edge. Then we do also Android, iPhones, Apple TV. Depending on what we're sending to, all the things that could possibly be grabbing onto that. One person will be sitting there looking at all of them and kind of going through them. The other thing that we do is we pipe a lot of those, at least the main feed, one of the YouTube feeds or Akamai feed or whatever we're using, into a computer that has audio scopes. And so we're using, we typically are using something like Loopback to send that audio, which we've already tested. We know kind of what it is, to look at levels and look at audio quality and so on and so forth, and video quality to make sure that it's working. Go ahead, Jeffrey. And for Chris, it's really confusing to take too many. Don't ever have more than 3 or 4 in the host view. Don't move more than 3 over at a time. Yeah, because it takes them out of the voting thing, and so we want to leave them there until we get to them. Anyway, go ahead. Next question. Or I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah. I do a lot of I used to do a lot of in-office streaming. Well, hopefully we're doing that again soon. But when we do that, we always have a lot of people that are in the office that are streaming on their computers and on their systems. And we always tell them, hey, hey, if we have enough bandwidth, that's great. But go ahead, and if you see any problems in whatever you're using, let us know, and you let us know what you're using in that way too.
And yeah, one of the things that is problematic is when you stream to a public CDN, is having a lot of people in a headquarters watch it. It can be devastating. So what you want to look at is, there's a company called Hive. Also, there's a company actually in Australia called, I want to say it's MetaCDN or StreamShark. They both handle peer-to-peer inside of companies, and also, of course, Kontiki does that, and Facebook's Workplace has that in the enterprise option of going peer-to-peer once it gets into the building. And that's going to greatly reduce the stress on your external connection if you're doing a large corporate event. Baiju and then Stuart, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, one just note on monitoring as well. For bigger events, we try to have somebody in different countries on different connections
Yep.
monitoring as well, because we've seen caching issues, especially with Vimeo actually. Not so much with YouTube, but with Vimeo and Livestream, we had that issues before. So we normally try to have them coming in, basically have a WhatsApp group, and they just send us, okay, what issues they're having, so we can monitor on site as well.
And one of the other things we do is we look at down detector a lot. So if we have that usually opened as a window of down detector, so we can see if we see a spike going up on YouTube or Google and we're streaming to YouTube, if we see that kind of impact and we're seeing some breakup or we're getting people saying that they're seeing breakup, we know that it's a system-wide, storm rather than something that necessarily is us. Stuart, you were going to, and the next question. Go ahead, Stuart.
It was just like that whether see if that's still muted. No,
You're breaking up.
Making sure that the network connection for the coming back in was on a different network to what was feeding out. And I think you covered that already.
Yeah, well, oftentimes we're trying to use as many different connections as possible. So Wi-Fi and the public Wi-Fi, the cellular, try to find all the different things, behaviors that people could be looking at it from. Yeah, absolutely. And then note that there is if you control click on YouTube, and a lot of these are hidden on a variety of different ones. Control click you'll see stats for geeks. And we usually have that open on our YouTube streams, and you'll see a whole bunch of extra data about the stream health that you don't see otherwise. Next question.
I think Mickey is worried about the storm that he's in the middle of. His question is, it's a Zoom webinar question. Have we 100% confirmed that if a host loses connection, the webinar continues and the host is handed off to a co-host? Worried about the storm, Mickey?
I'm not 100% certain, but I'm 99% certain that it will just drop off to a co-host if you drop off. I think it'll come back to me as the owner. I have to admit that I haven't done it in the wild. I've just, we've handed off, but we'll find out, won't we? It's all the same link.
Yeah, last time, like, all my power went out, and luckily, yeah, it came back just a few minutes before the show.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer, and I keep on meaning to test it, and then I forget. So we should test that and just have, we'll do that on another day.
Send you a message.
Yeah, go ahead, John Edelson.
It's good to assign a co-host if you think you're having issues like that. And I believe if you don't sign one, it usually goes to the person who's the first one who signed in. But I'd have to go ask somebody to make sure that's still true.
Okay. Jeffrey.
I also believe that it also depends on what type of Zoom level you're at. The free one, I think, will just completely cut out, and maybe the business one as well.
Next question. Oh, go ahead, Mickey. Mickey, real quick, and then next question.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I don't believe you're able to assign co-hosts on the free account of Zoom, so that's probably why.
Yep, there you go.
So Matt Sloan says, last week's discussion of the Blackmagic 12K made me realize that I don't know how my Blackmagic 6K handles downsampling. When shooting ProRes HQ in 4K, is it simply throwing away the extra pixels, or is it doing something smarter like a bicubic interpolation?
I think that it's doing some kind of interpolation, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think that generally you're getting actually a cleaner image on that scale down. Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, this new chat system, so my hotkey doesn't work. Does it work? I'll come back to you. Sorry, give me one second.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that we would, if it was doing something like nearest neighbor, we would definitely see it. You'd see aliasing, which we don't see when it goes down. So I don't think that's the case. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. Do you lose, because I don't know that camera, if you go from 6K to 4K, does it crop in your field of view? Mm-hmm. It doesn't. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it may crop it if it's a slightly different, there's some slightly different aspect ratios that will crop it. But if you're like the 5.7 or whatever, there's a couple different aspect ratios, but you can change those resolutions and it's not cutting in to the center. It's not doing a center cut. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and some cameras, like on my GH5, for example, you have a choice. You can do either interpolation or it does like a center cut. And the advantage of the center cut, sometimes if you're stuck, you need a little bit extra reach.
Yep, and we've used that. and I haven't tried that. It may be hidden in the camera, and I just haven't bothered because I don't like I like getting the oversampling. But we've definitely used it in the URSAs I know the URSAs have it, and we used it to do exactly what you're talking about, which is that we get a little bit more length out of our zoom.
Yeah, well, I've used it when in Europe, even for pictures, well, for video, and sometimes you just need a little bit more, and it helps, and you don't really lose anything except the oversampling.
Yeah, and the reason the oversampling is the most important reason for the oversampling is that it gets rid of a lot of grain. So you end up with when you go from the 4K to 1080p or something bigger down, any kind of grain that you had there. So you just have to be careful of your gain settings inside the camera, because that center crop is going to look a lot grainier than you were getting with that oversample. It's just the same as the 4K. It's just that it's now in the center. So
a quick definition of oversample, please.
Oversample means you have more pixels at some point, and then you squeeze it down to a smaller picture. And when you do that, as it interpolates all of that on the way in, it's averaging all those things out and making it oftentimes looks a little sharper, a little less grain. So it generally improves the image when it's done well. We do that a lot in computer graphics. We think of oversampling all the time because when you render out, if you rendered out exactly what came out of the computer, you'd see all this jagged edges. So what we do is we set the oversampling. So literally a 16:1 oversample will be like it renders the image 16 times higher than the image that you're trying to get, and then it squeezes it down. And when it does that, it creates nice soft edges, and so because it's averaging all those bits and pieces back together. So in computer graphics, we always oversample to some degree. It can be 4:1, 2:1, 8:1, 16:1. Obviously, all of it takes longer to render because it's rendering a giant image that you're not using. So, but that oversampling oftentimes will improve the overall quality of the image. Cameras are just a little bit oversampling.
But and where does 72 dots per inch? I know that's old print days, but
well, that's just DPI. That's the dots per number of dots in an image. 72 comes from what we used to think of as our screen resolution. When you were printing to, that's a whole conversation there. But generally your dots per inch are if I remember correctly, 1.6 your line screen. Anyway, so that's a whole nother. Sometimes you go to 2, but if you go too high, then you'll end up with bleed. Anyway, Vipul.
Thank you.
My experience of downsampling from say 12K to 4K or HD or something like that, usually that would introduce Gaussian blur. So the image would be a little soft actually. And you may need to run one sharpness filter or something like that.
That has not been my experience. I haven't, it depends on, I think, where you sharpen it and how you do it. I mean, and also a lot if you're doing it in software, you oftentimes have choices about how it's going to handle it. So it'll tell you how am I going to interpolate those pixels when I go down. But yeah, we haven't seen it. My experience hasn't been that. And we've definitely, again, even if you're doing 1080p output, we would do this all the time with the early reds, because even though the early reds were 4K, they weren't useful 4K. And so the very, very first generation, we would shoot everything in 4K and then immediately sample it down to 1080p. Go ahead, Don, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just one simple advantage too of downsampling versus just cutting into the image is depth of field, right? If you have to crop into the sensor a little bit, then in order to get the same framing, you'll have to be farther away from your subject, and your depth of field is going to be greater. If you want that background to be non-distracting and soft, then oversampling is a great way, not just in terms of the overall pixel quality, but the depth of field and what you want to actually present in terms of your subject.
Absolutely. Next question.
Nate Parcell says, I've been tasked with finding a way to have several hundred attendees all introduce themselves live for 8 to 10 seconds in a live event produced in vMix. Any suggestions on doing this in a Zoom meeting using the spotlight feature for each attendee?
I mean, that would be a lot easier than doing it in vMix. I mean, you could. So, yeah, I mean, go ahead, Mickey. Go.
Yeah, I don't know if we could somehow tie this into my question that's in the queue, but maybe you can have multiple co-hosts like prep to spotlight someone next. I don't know, like fix it with manpower.
I mean, the next question that Mickey is referring to, he says, can we confirm that a co-host can spotlight panelists as well as not just the host?
Can you spotlight panelists? Chris, you're a co-host, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to spotlight.
But I don't think attendees will see that.
Spotlight video.
Yep.
I just spotlighted John. Spotlit.
It worked.
In the chat, can attendees say if they see John?
Yes. Say if you see John.
All right.
Where
They
is
see
John
John.
it's
So,
working.
Yeah.
so co-hosts can also spotlight.
So that makes sense. Then co-hosts you could
But
want A, B, and C.
The main thing is that you could, so they can spotlight it. The main issue would be that if Mickey changed his view back to grid or whatever, then the spotlight would be overridden by if he's doing the edit. So, so I don't know how those. I don't know if those tied together.
So maybe
but 8
you
to
can
10
have
seconds.
maybe you can have like 3 co-hosts that are like have a list. Okay, you take this list, this other person takes this list, and then just be ready to spotlight people so you could do it.
Yeah, I mean,
quickly.
I think I'd still probably just have one person spotlighting. The main thing is I think that what we've learned to do over time is to warn the next person that we're coming to them, because everyone has a different view inside of Zoom. So when you're saying Jeffrey with John coming next, that kind of thing is something that lets each person know that they're going to be jumped on, they're going to be jumped to on, as it's going through. I think that'd probably be the best behavior.
Would you be doing that via the list view as opposed to the PyCon view? And that would be kind of tough because you wouldn't know if somebody is.
I would do it in the icon view. So I would, and I would, but I think that you could, I think I wouldn't have more than one person because I think it would just create a lot of confusion, in that process. I think I'd have one person jumping. It doesn't take that long. This gets back into what Zoom needs is what Hangouts had for a long time called sticky clicking, which is that you just click on the window that you want to show up in the broadcast and you just, it just snaps to them rather than that little drop down that you have to do for each person. It's kind of a pain in the neck.
What scared me is going through 200 people that way.
It's more than 2. I think that once you got into it, I would rehearse it, but I think it'd be fine. All right, next question.
Hasmuk says, I have untethered my Sidekick IEM from Premix with a Rode Go. I use Premix Advanced mode for the DPA 4066. The volume wheel for the headsets can often be confused with the gain control for the mic. Is Advanced the only option for this setup?
This is in the MixPre?
I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Hasmuk, is that what you mean?
It's in a MixPre. Alex, you couldn't hear me yesterday because I mixed up the gain option between advanced and basic.
I have mine on advanced all the time. Like there's too many features that I'm using that I need that for. Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things I would recommend, Hasmuk and Mickey actually turned me onto this, is the Korg controller. It's a little USB fader box that plugs right into the MixPre.
There you go.
And you can control you can set there's a fader for each input. There we go. And then the knobs at the top can be used either as gain or pan, or there's a third function. And it makes it easier to only reach for a knob that has a single purpose, or a fader that has a single purpose.
Yep. Yeah.
So it plugs right into the MixPre. Done.
That's awesome. Mickey, can you put a link up, please? Thanks.
Yep. Next question.
Matt says, until we have a full hour on Zoom, I've set up a Zoom room to try to up the quality of our Zoom calls, but we're not seeing any improvement. We have enabled HD, but aren't getting it. Any ideas why?
Well, I guess the question is, are you getting, yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, you'll need to reach out to Zoom support and have them enable it. There's actually a little support ticket that you can open up, and it says right there, if you reach out to them, that they will turn it on for you. You got to have a business account though, so that might be the issue.
Nick, go ahead, Mickey, real quick.
I think also another limitation is once you go over 3 people, I believe. Please correct me, Guy. It drops down to standard def.
3 people in the grid view, or 3 people
within the meeting.
Within the meeting,
is
no,
that
in
not,
the meeting,
is that
well, it depends
limitation not in the Zoom room?
No, in the meeting, we're getting 720 across the board. We're actually for our business account, we actually had them turn on 1920 by 1080. So we're actually getting full blown HD now on our account, which is incredible.
wow.
And I think, Alex, you should be having it come in the
Yep.
Zoom's watching this show, and they reached out to me, and they're enabling it on yours as well. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah.
Very good. That's good. Yeah, and we're definitely seeing a higher quality in. I know that our viewers have been seeing 640 by 360. YouTube is seeing 720p.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to get is webinar mode kicking out 720p to attendees, and that's what I keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And
Right.
it's supposed to be coming, but
Right.
I'm pushing.
Very good. All right, thank you. Next question.
Next question. Rick Combs says, I have a Rode shotgun mic going into the ATEM Mini. After playing video from the PC on port 3 and then switching back to main camera on port 1, there is a 15 to 20 second delay before the sound comes back to full volume. You can hear the volume, but it's about half volume before it comes back to full.
Wow.
Sounds like a really bad implementation of AGC, automatic gain control.
I mean, that could be it.
Blackmagic's full attention to audio.
Yeah, I will admit that for me it's hard because I don't really use audio in the in the mixers, so in the switchers. So I always embed it somewhere else, or almost always embed it somewhere else, or I embed the entire program into it, so it never is switching inputs. It does sound like some kind of AGC issue where it's auto gain control, where it's got something loud and then it comes back to something and it's got a really slow attack. Go ahead, Stuart.
Is the person who asked the question on Windows 10, I've noticed on my own system where the audio is coming in via NDI when I test before it goes into Zoom, that the machine that I'm actually streaming from or like running Zoom on, the audio will slowly creep back up after his voice. It's background noise. So I'm wondering if there's something in Windows 10 that is actually AGC.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it does sound like a really slow attack on an AGC. Next question.
Tony says, regarding the size of backgrounds to ensure adequate coverage, what dimensions may be a minimum/ideal do you recommend? I think he's talking about the background behind you.
I'm using 6x7, and as you make it smaller, it just needs to be closer to you. As it gets closer
Meters?
to you, you can start to. Sorry, say that again.
Meters?
6x7 feet.
Oh.
I'm American. I'm limited. I'm limited in my
Freedom
understanding.
units.
Yeah. So so the freedom units. Anyway, so as you move, as it gets smaller from 6x7 feet, or like a little over 2 meters by 2 meters, as it gets closer, you're gonna pull it closer to you to fill the frame, and as you do that, you might start seeing more shadow of yourself onto that back frame. So that's the thing, that you can get it smaller. You can probably get it down to 1.5 meters on each direction, or about 4 feet or so. But the anyway, so but you'd have to put it right behind you, and that becomes more problematic. Go ahead, Bill, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I
Bill
think
and
this is an optical geometry problem, and it depends on the camcorder or the camera lens. If you're using a webcam or whatever, webcams are notorious, some of them, for having a really wide angle lens. And so if you're using a really wide angle lens, you're going to get a lot of outside. Alex has recommended a few times that you use little zoom lenses, at least on the Micro Four Thirds cameras, which will allow you to push in and get rid of some of that stuff with a real life crop.
And with all of these things, whether it's green screen or backgrounds, know that as you move that camera away and you zoom in, you're gonna get you're basically compressing everything so that you can have a smaller background. In that, when we used to do green screens in our office, the camera was 20 feet from the subject was 10 feet from a relatively small green screen, and it all filled frame. So it has a bunch of other things, other effects on depth of field and other things. So you have to think about that. And also, it's harder to nudge it right above your monitor if it's or see your monitor if you pull it too far away. But definitely changing your focal length will affect it. Sky, and then we'll move on.
So, Alex, I assume you're like at an f4 or something like that, and your backdrop is how far behind you, sir? I missed that.
My backdrop is about I think it's about 4 feet behind me, or it's
okay. It's 6'7". And then Bill, how far behind you is your backdrop?
I think it's about the same. I try to get it farther, but because it's a pop-up background, it's not particularly large, and I have to watch my corners in the morning when I set it up.
Yeah. So it's
Exactly. Okay.
and mine's right on the corners too. No.
And,
Next question.
and my backdrop is about 4 feet also. But it's actually not moving. It's real.
Yeah, exactly. All right, next question.
David Anderson says, what microphone do you recommend to decrease room noise when using an iPad for FaceTime or Zoom meetings?
So it depends on what you want it to look like. You know, if you're going to get rid of a lot of stuff, I mean, an SM58 or a PR40, you know, so a Shure SM58 or a Heil PR40 is going to get rid of a lot of your room noise, but you're going to, you know, it's going to be a big mic in front of you. You can also we have some people using Pyles here that are $15, and, you know, getting that source or that pickup closer to your mouth is going to allow you to turn it down and get rid of a lot of the other things that are going on there. So those would be the kind of the first things that I would, you know, look at. I mean, I'm using for that reason, that's why I'm using this is a DPA 4066, same thing. Pull it closer. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think, well, that's really a like, you know, for productions, that's minimum requirement. But if it's just a meeting wherein, I mean, you're just talking to colleagues, simple, like, I know, Apple headset should vastly increase the quality, as opposed to using an open speaker and, you know, just a built-in microphone.
Yep. And then Rode makes a couple reasonably good ones that will pop into your Lightning or headset jack that work pretty well as well. Next question.
Attila says, recommendations for how to best communicate notes and ideas to an editor who's just starting out, desperately trying to avoid the nagging thought that it's less work to do things myself than to write up notes and to sit in meetings about what needs to be done. Asking for an imaginary friend.
You know, what we use for all of that is Frame.io. You know, Frame.io is, you know, you post that up there, you give everybody notes. It's easy to track. It's easy to manage as far as how that goes. Chris, and then Phil, and then Bill, real quick.
I would say that the most important thing, we talk about this a lot, it's a wetware issue. You have to, that young editor or somebody starting out, they need to learn the process of how to interpret what you say. And you as a producer probably have to learn the process of how to communicate those ideas. Frame.io is a great way to do it, but it's the whole language and the process. And it's one of those learning curve things. When you get over that, you will streamline your work. You can that, and then you can have mini editors working for you. So you have to get over you really have to get over I can just do it myself.
And what I will say is, as someone who's built a bunch of these teams, oftentimes from folks coming out of school, where I want to mix a couple people that are really experienced in my crew, so that it's not just me having to give them feedback. But the other thing is that younger editors are more work at the beginning, but way less work in the middle and the end, because they learn your pipeline and they learn how to do it, and they don't have a bunch of they don't have hardening of the opinions, and so it's just easier when you start mixing a whole bunch of editors. There's an advantage to mixing really advanced editors because they all cross pollinate as long as they're doing that. But a lot of times they're like, this is the way I do it, and I only use this program, and I only do it this way. And young editors tend not to be that way. And so you can, if you really know what you want, if you don't know what you want, then hire a really advanced one and let them run with it. If you know what you want, hiring younger editors and then fusing them, you know, into your pipeline can be a lot easier in that process. And then, but again, nothing beats having a great experienced, a group of experienced editors that kind of guide that and do the more complicated or things that need to move faster. A lot of the events that I work on now, I'm typically starting with 10 or 15 years of experience before for the kind of jobs that we want to do. But for a lot of the smaller stuff, we want to constantly be bringing up new talent. And that's not by age, by the way. I mean, a lot of times we get new editors that are 35, redefining, or 40 or 50, or, and it's just a matter of where they are in their development cycle and their opinion you go ahead, Philip, and then Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I've been doing this. I've been an editor for 30 years, so I've lived all stages of this, and now I'm teaching other people. And one thing I found is that you never win in a way what you think you're going to tell them how to do it your way, but you're not them. So I focus on actually them. I mean, even comes a little bit more from an acting background, or, like teach them how to feel the film and make it cool to them. Wait a little bit, just like you said, once they get the technical thing, so the ability to edit easily with the software, they will surprise you with really cool stuff. And they need confidence to do that.
And it's important to have kind of roundtables pretty often, specifically so that you can see how they're doing it. There's a lot of times you'll find that they're doing something that they can't fix and edit because they did something earlier on, and maybe they can't get it out of that edit. But it's super important. Like when we have Steve Bays here, I learn all kinds of things that I was doing horribly inefficiently. So being able to actually talk about what the problems are, where those pain points are, is important.
Yeah, guys, just say real quick. Also, I teach, and so you were teaching. If you want to really learn how to communicate to other editors, teach a class, and you'll have 25 students or something. You will learn fast.
It's also a great way to find new talent. And Philip, your audio is still pretty rough. Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to double check this because this happens particularly in voiceover a ton. There's a thing where experienced voice talent will have somebody do line readings for them, usually a producer on the other side of the glass. And it always has struck me that you're turning your talent from an interpreter to a mimic, to a copyist. You're trying to get them to copy how you do it. That is never as successful as hiring somebody who's good and letting them interpret it the way they do.
Next question.
Victor says, when recording on 3 cameras separately, should I turn on audio on all 3 in order to sync, or is using a slate on my main mic and adjusting clips in Final Cut 10 good enough?
I always try to have my audio on my cameras and feeding the mix in, and a lot of times if I'm feeding the mix into the camera, I want it to go into one channel and still get the onboard mic on the other channel because that won't have any sync issues. And so definitely getting those audio sources makes life a lot easier, especially if they get separated, that type of thing. So it's important. No, absolutely. I would definitely go that. Yeah, go ahead, Mickey. Then we'll move on.
Yeah, depending on the situation, the reliability of syncing via waveform, audio waveform, could be hit or miss, especially in larger sets or locations. For Victor's sax jam setup, I mean, you shouldn't have issues with that. But generally speaking, I would rely on waveform syncing as a last resort. Most of the time on sets, our primary would be timecode syncing if that's possible with your setup, and then our second choice would be a slate, and then we try to avoid relying on audio waveform syncing, and either way, like whatever method of syncing you do, always slate. It just helps everyone down the line.
And when we are in the field and we have, let's say, 3 cameras and a person sitting there in a shoot in a room, a lot of times, if we're in the old days, if we didn't have time code, if we didn't have all those things, we'd get all the cameras right at the very beginning to all look at them and just do what we call a mini slate. Just give me a mini slate, and they just go. And that was, the worst one is when they go like this, and you're like, no, just one. And we use that to kind of get everything close together. That's kind of pure guerrilla process. Go ahead, Chris, and then Victor, and then we'll move on.
The other thing about having the audio on, Victor, is you're just going to hear, if not the slate person calling out the shot, but you might just hear something, oh, this is definitely the same take.
And one of the things that I try to do, it doesn't work all the time and it doesn't work on big film sets, but if I'm doing a multicam shoot, I try to frame the camera, especially on a single camera where I'm doing pickup or training, but I try to frame the cameras, start rolling the camera when the slate is up. That means that the first frame of my video is always the slate. That way, when you're looking for something and if the names aren't right or whatever, when you see one of our captures when we're building Mac breaks or we're doing other training, you'll just see as we load all those images in the QuickTimes in our Finder, you just see a whole bunch of slates. So we put slate in, then roll camera, then slate it, then mark it, and it makes it much easier when you're looking through that. Go ahead, Victor.
So I'm assuming that until I get one of those little cool mini slates, I can do the whole clap thing here and hold it, and that should be good enough.
You can, but it's the mini slate is $11 and a day away. And they're not very expensive. You can get relatively inexpensive ones without too much trouble. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and you can voice slate it as well, but that would mean you have to play it back to know what it is, instead of just seeing the first frame. But a piece of paper will work as well.
Yeah, Mark, Chris.
Like a clothes peg. We've made mini slates using like a C47, like a wooden clothes peg with a little piece of 2-inch white gaffer tape underneath. And because it's got the spring, it makes the little clip noise when you do it. I haven't got it within arm's reach, but it's pretty cool. And it
Chris,
works.
I'll go for the $12. I can handle that thing.
That's good in a pinch. I never thought of that. All right.
Easier than finding a clothesline these days.
Chris will sell you a C47 for $12.
There you go. A C47, for anyone who doesn't know, is a clothespin. It's just there's many rumors about why it's called C47. Go ahead, Chris. We're going to move to the next one. We're going to start speeding up. We're running out of time.
Doug Ferguson says, we used Vimeo for the first time last week on a big show streaming to the client's website. Tested 2 different times, no problems. After a minute into the real show, the stream had a problem. And long story short, had to create a new stream, used TC1 to vMix to Vimeo. Thoughts on the path change?
Did it just stop, or did it break up? What were the symptoms of the live stream?
It just stopped, and the tech guys came in running in like, hey, the stream's down, and like, yeah, we already know because we were monitoring it. And Tucker was actually on the crew, and we were logged in, and we don't know if it was the PC that was running vMix was the problem. We don't know if it was Vimeo, because they've been having a lot of problems lately that I've read. So, and then once the stream stopped, then of course that event's done, and then we had to create a new one, and we started 6 minutes late, and I was not happy.
Yeah, I mean and I will admit, live streams, platform isn't as stable as I'd like it to be, in that process. So we're using a primary and backup ingest, or just primary? Because I think it
just primary.
I think you have to get a different service to do that with the live stream. Go ahead.
Yeah, Tucker was suggesting, I was using the API, so I logged into my Vimeo account, and he goes, no, use the RTMP key. That might be a better way. But it's still, we don't know what happened.
I will admit that I've been doing this for a while, so I never know whether it's me being old fashioned or not, but I tend to be an RTMP person. Like, I don't like the APIs because I feel like they do things for me that I didn't request. So I tend to like to have the RTMP, because then I can look at just whether I'm sending it out or not. The other thing you can do is push it to the cloud and then push it to your CDN. And the reason you do that is also because you can point it somewhere else at the same time. So if you send it up to something like either Restream or AWS, you can send it to Vimeo from there, but you can also send it out as an Akamai, or not Akamai, but send it out as an HLS. You can be looking at the HLS. If something breaks up over there, you immediately know which one is which. You don't have to think about it, because you have a parallel path that lets you quality control it. Garrick, and then Jeffrey.
The same thing happened to us for one stream a couple years ago, and we had to recreate a whole stream. But once we changed to using a recurring event, then that problem kind of went away. So maybe look at recurring events on live stream, or I mean on Vimeo. Yeah. And we used Restream for a while, and it would cut out all the time, but the recurring event would keep the stream going, and then the stream just actually had a pause in it, and then it would pick back up, and it wouldn't wouldn't close the event when it got interrupted.
Yeah, we use persistent keys everywhere we can find them. It just makes it a lot simpler. Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Yeah, I agree on that. The other thing is, I always like to find any type of option or button that says I start and stop the stream. I know YouTube has it. I know Facebook has it. I'm not sure if Vimeo has that option, but if it just saved me 100 times when my computer died. I can bring it back up and go right back in the stream.
Yep. And they've all had this problem. We've had false ends on Facebook, on YouTube, Hangouts on Air, all the, it is a problem. It's where it gets twitchy about, I don't have enough data, and I'm just going to turn it off, rather than just waiting for it. And all platforms have had this to some degree, and they've all kind of gotten through it over time to learn to not do that. Now, go ahead, Chris. Next question.
Larry Tang says, what's a good HDMI multi-view device to show 4 HDMI devices onto one large flat screen?
I mean, what?
ATEM Mini Pro.
Well, that you can Pro, yeah. You can also we use there's a 4MV and a 16 a 4 multi-view that Blackmagic makes that I think is like $495 or whatever. But that's SDI in and then HDMI out. Mike and then Garrick.
There's an LG monitor has 4 HDMI inputs on it, and do 4 on a screen.
It will.
So,
that's great.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, it's reasonably priced, but it's a 50-inch monitor that Jeff was talking about. He has those in his plate in the studio.
That's great. Garrick.
That's really cool, Mike. Thanks for saying that. I just recently did this and just bought a cheap HDMI 4-in-1. It's called Nearbo on Amazon. It was $82, so it's working fine. The quality's not pristine, but it really does the job for what I need. So I'll post a link in the chat if anyone wants to check that out.
Yeah, it's great. Bill, nope. Okay. Nope. Okay. Next question.
John Baker says, Barker, sorry. What do we all want from tomorrow's Blackmagic ATEM live production and post-production?
I think that I'm just hoping that they sync up all the switchers. So that's my big wish is that we've got this situation where the 2MEs and the 1MEs and some of the other switchers don't have the new keyer. They don't have some of the other stuff that's built in, and so there's this weird like if I buy this, I'm not going to get this, and I'm but not like just the general features, but I don't have the new keyer. I don't have a bunch of other things, and so hopefully they're all going to be synced up so that everything between the minis and the Constellation are all kind of on the same hardware platform, because some of them are just older and they don't have some of the stuff that has been improved on. I feel like that's the obvious fix for them. I don't think we're going to see anything bigger or smaller than what we've already seen. I think it's realigning the whole middle ground process. Go ahead, Bill.
As fast as Grant is moving, I'm expecting ATEM on a watch OS.
On watch OS, cut. Yeah, so yeah, has preview. It just has that'd be a really fun one, like a preview and I don't know. Anyway, so there's some graphic that I want to now tweet somewhere about that. But yeah, I think that the big things that occur in the Constellation and some of the other stuff on the way through is A, the Teranex is on every input. B, the new multi-views that we see in the Constellation, and C, the keyer. And I think if we can see that kind of ground through all of the features, I think that would be a really nice update for us. Go ahead, Stuart, and then we'll move on.
Firstly, Bill, well played. We're laughing. I would love to see BMD get involved with NDI, because I think a company with their development cycles would really push the software forward a lot better than it is being at the moment.
I'd be surprised, but it'd be interesting to see if they do it. Yeah, it's but I guess because that would put them in a weird position with Constellation. I think they're probably still a little ways away, and I think there's probably some decision about whether it's 2110 or NDI or what you support there. Next question.
Phil wants to know any thoughts on today's tech industry, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google grilling today in DC, Washington, DC.
They're big enough that they have enough control that I think that they're going to keep on getting looked at. I think that they have to make decisions based on understanding that they're all about an inch away from antitrust. I actually think that Apple's probably the least, because it doesn't really, unless you define, there's no way to really define Apple as a majority market anywhere. You can't say that they're a majority market in their own app. That's that's a circular that's circular logic. But so I think that I think Google's control over advertising, or with Google AdWords and stuff like that, is far more prevalent than something that. So I think that Apple's probably got the least to worry about. But I think that they're all getting big enough where it becomes an issue, and it's going to become more of an issue now after COVID, because Amazon is taking a lot of ground. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I would say that taking a lot of ground, that their growth rate is astonishing, and it is affecting Main Street. So I do think that there's some regulation in the future if they're going to level the playing field a little bit.
I think that a lot of companies should just think about how they can make a difference. I think with all of these things, getting on, I think that sometimes they really get into this how do I, how do we maximize profits and so on and so forth. But I think that figuring out a way to impact the world positively that's outside of their general income is something that's important, not from just that it makes a difference, but that it is it's good for PR. And I think that companies have to get much more aggressive about that outreach in the future, because I think it's going to become more and more of an issue. It's going to be probably more important than their advertising efforts. Anyway, next question.
Larry Tang says, I'm trying to match my GoPro with all my cameras in the studio. Is there a good solution to do this? Would a waveform monitor be good for this? And what's a good waveform monitor device?
Go ahead, Sky.
The shorter answer is no. But the reality is you have to make choices, because you're putting a Shetland and a plow horse in the same harness.
That's great.
And I've actually done that on a game show where they had $60,000 studio cameras with amazing lenses. And then, of course, in the midst of the action, they would throw GoPros, and I was supposed to color match all of that. So yes, obviously a waveform will help you, but you're only working with 6 crayons in the box with the GoPro, and you've got, a whole 64 crayons in the Canon. So make it what it is. Let it be what it is. And so don't try to, you got to match the blues and you got to match the greens, but otherwise you will never match the optics. You will never match the density of the quality, but you have to make choices. Jeff,
the other thing is
go ahead.
Generally our approach to color correction is that we match all the cameras to the lowest common denominator. So the camera, it is, but if we're trying to get all the cameras to truly match, you take the camera with the least amount of control and you get it to where you're happiest with it. And then you take the ones that you have the most control and you bring it down to that. It's why we try to avoid using GoPro cameras. We'd rather use the micros. So the Blackmagic Micro lets us then match all that stuff and we have all that control back. So in a production, we tend to move to the micros. We've stopped using the GoPros other than witness cameras and like crew cameras and stuff like that. We don't use them in production.
And let the GoPro
reason.
be what it is. Make it horrible on purpose and let it be that.
Right. Jeffrey awesome. And then Chris, 15 seconds each. We're going to go into speed round.
I was going to ask what's the good alternative to the GoPro, and I think you just answered
the micro. Yeah, the micro is a great alternative to the GoPro. Chris?
Yeah, in line with what you guys are saying about let it be what it is, does it make sense to put a little label on that camera, however it might be, just to say like, oh, this is the live, this is the GoPro, this is the whatever, this is the whatever.
Just a lot of producers won't want to add that. And you're also, every time you add something, especially nowadays, you've got bubbles going across the top on a live stream, and you've got tickers and you've got lower thirds. And so every piece of graphic that you add to something becomes part of a huge logistical issue of where do we put it so that's not underneath something else. Mickey, real quick.
Yeah, what you and Sky were talking about was doing it in post. What are the options for doing it for a live broadcast, like doing the shading and for live?
Wait, say that again. Sorry, Mickey.
Like say if you want to shade a GoPro for a live broadcast,
not really.
Are there any hardware options to do that?
Not that we know of. All right, next question. We're gonna move fast.
Does anybody remember the monkey cam from David Letterman? Does anyone have experience with HighFive Conferencing app? How does it stack up against the Zoom, WebEx, etc.?
Nope. I've never used it. I don't know. It's one of the few that I've never used. We'll have to take a look for it and try it out. All right, next question.
Alan Scott says, for someone expanding to online training as a personal business, do you have any comments or suggestions for learning management systems?
I haven't found one that I like. John?
Sorry about that. I don't like learning management systems, but there's a very interesting one out. I just put in the chat called VCN. It was created by Ali Jafari. He was the one who created Angel, that was bought by Blackboard. If you do a Google search on LMSs, you'll see there's probably about 30 of them. They're, Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, Desire to Learn are the big ones. And then there are some companies that have proprietary ones that are doing business. But check out thecn.com.
Next question.
Tucker says, on the newer Blackmagic ATEM switchers, can you disable the Teranex processing on each input to keep the lowest possible latency for live in-room applications?
So I think that if you keep all the cameras at the same resolution and frame rate as the switcher, and you gen lock them, it will not do any. You won't have any latency. But it's if it has to make that conversion, it slows everything down. So you just have to make sure that they're all. You used to have to do that manually. Now you have to do it. You used to have to do that because you couldn't see the cameras. Now you have to do it, and I believe that you will reduce your latency if you do that. Next question.
Does anybody still know how to gen lock?
Yeah.
What's a good mixer equivalent in price and features set and feature set to the Behringer Xenyx Q602 USB? I think it's been back ordered for months. Sam Greenwood.
I looked at that. I think that the question was in Discord last night, and I couldn't find one that would match that in the same price range. Next question. We're going to move really quickly because we're
Josh Clayton says, looking for good suggestions for a decoder that can handle third-party devices to receive feeds from other broadcast departments at universities for a multi-viewer or world feed.
We got the hard ones here, right at the very end. I don't have any off-the-shelf solution for that. Yeah, I mean, I think that you'd have to. I mean, I admit that my hardware version of that would be to ask, to stack up a bunch of pieces of hardware that we're looking at it and then pumping them into a multi-view and putting them into that. I don't think there's anything that I know of that would do it out of the shelf. Colin?
Well, I mean, the easy and overly trivial software solution is just to grab any switcher you want and drag and pull in the feed. It'll be decoded and displayed for you. Yeah. But I assume the question wants more detail and more thought than that. I'm not sure what I don't know. I'm not sure how they want it consumed.
Yeah.
Is it just for monitoring or for redistribution or what?
With a fast enough computer, you can open them in multiple web pages. To
I mean,
Colin's point, just have
it could be that trivial. I just don't think it should be.
Yeah, but it's a little bit to manage. Next question.
Paul King says, anyone have the scoop on unlimited IRL? What alternative do you recommend for data plans?
Does anyone know anything about unlimited IRL?
Nope.
Is that a service?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm using unlimited IRL on a Verizon plan and a AT&T. Jeff Keithley had suggested somebody else, and it was much cheaper, but I went to go sign up after canceling my plans because they're about $130 a month for the AT&T and $170 for the Verizon. So when I saw Jeff's, I was like, great. But then they said, like, no, that they're not taking on any new clients. So do your homework, find out if it truly is unlimited, because at some point they might cap you, whereas unlimited IRL, I use them with the live view, and I found that they do what they say, and you can get them with the hardware, or at least the hardware as well. So we have the little Netgear Nighthawk. That's the one that has the Ethernet. So you might want to look at renting that device, because then it's Wi-Fi or Ethernet into your device over cellular. So
for those of us neophytes, what is it that they say they do?
Unlimited data over cellular. So it's basically like an AT&T.
It's just the data service. Okay, I thought it was an actual product. Okay,
yeah, that's cool.
They call it unlimited IRL.
IRL is in real life, and
but that seems like a stupid name for a data service. Okay, that's what threw me.
I was trying to figure out what in real life meant too. So anyway, next question. I don't want to go too deep into
David Anderson says, what audio stream do you recommend using Audio Implement's earpiece and a Pyle microphone to go into an iPad or MacBook Air? So some sort of input device.
I need to test this. I think, MacBook Air, I would use this little guy, the one that I bought. This is the TechRise one. It has headphone and mic input, and I know it works with the Pyle. I haven't tried it with the headset, but it should work just fine. But this TechRise one, Mike, did you test this one? Did you get it as well?
Yeah, I haven't used that yet, but we're going
Okay.
on your word that
Yeah.
it works.
I just want to see if someone else. Yeah.
Yeah,
I take it that's
Colin has a
USB-C,
different
right?
one. Colin has the one that we put in the
I,
links.
I
The
do have a
smaller
different one, but it's not USB-C. So you would want a USB-C to USB-A adapter.
Right. Yeah.
But I
Absolutely.
imagine
All right.
it'll work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Next question.
Hillary House says, does anybody have any experience with BlueJeans events? Alex?
I've never had any BlueJeans events. They do have an event platform. I've never used it. I get to experience BlueJeans every day, and I do not like it. That's all I know is that I don't like the video conferencing. It's just weird. You don't know why they're putting up what windows and why and what it looks like, and it doesn't. You have to use a virtual camera. You can't see camera, input devices. So yeah, I don't know how the events work, but I do know that the conferencing is below par, far below Zoom. Next question.
George Kennedy says, hey, George, Alex, will Mukana continue as a web-based interface versus an app? I love taking advantage of Grammarly.com.
It will continue to be used. It will continue to have a web app for a long time, but it is, eventually we'd probably have a standalone app that would do some of this stuff. Anyway, so, and I think we're gonna change directions here. And yeah, it's do people like the new feature of when Chris hits answer, you guys see it in the chat? Is that a good thing?
It took, I will say it took me a while to realize that that's when it went into the chat. So about halfway through, I realized when you said next question, I had to click that button. So it would go into the chat.
It's a good concept. The highlighting could be improved, maybe.
Yeah, it's first.
What about
first
the
day.
quotes?
Yeah, a good idea though.
Yeah.
What about the quotes? And I noticed that a couple times there were a couple quotes in there.
Quotes?
A couple quotes.
Oh
yeah,
that was
Alex.
That's a downside of me trying to be a smart, a clean show word. Just typing quotes in. I forgot that when I go from the operator thing, it says that it's from Mukana.
Right.
And I'm running out of computers and accounts and email addresses.
Okay. Cool.
Sorry about
all right. All good. Now we are going to shift gears. So let's go ahead and clear the deck here.
Actually, the first question is from
that's a good one. So we'll leave that one for Chris. And anyway, all right. So we have had a slew of cameras. I guess it was, it's camera time and everyone's talking about cameras. So Chris, why don't you give us an overview of what you've been noticing happening? And while Chris is doing that, if you've got questions about the new cameras that have been released, as we're talking through it, let us know and go ahead and throw them into the queue. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Alex. How's my level, Mickey? It's just proximity for me, so I hope this is all right. A lot of cameras, and I just wanted to carry on discussing them. It was a great chat last week with Blackmagic, but I've put some chat links in the chat over a few messages. No slides today. It really is just a discussion, so jump in. There's the Sigma FP, which is released by Sigma. They've recently gotten a great firmware update where they've got Apple ProRes RAW off-board recording with Atomos and a few other features. All of these cameras, barring one, are full frame, meaning full frame 35, on the side. There's the Canon R5 and the R6, which I'm sure everyone's been following closely. There's the new Sony A7S III, which is very, very new. And the last one I wanted to discuss briefly was the Fujifilm GFX 100, which is a medium format stills camera. It's something like 102 megapixels, but it has a video mode. And that also has a firmware update recently, which allows it to have off-board Apple ProRes recording, again, using the, I think it's the Atomos system. So the GFX 100 is medium format, but everything else that I've just discussed, everything is full frame 35 millimeter format, yeah? Got it.
No, go ahead.
35, yeah. The Sigma FP is really, really nice. A lot of people have been using it not just for a production camera, but people have been using it on sets as a viewfinder. Because it's a full frame sensor and it's so small, You can just stick a handle to it and put like a little, like the Zacuto style viewfinder on the back of the LED, and that'll be like a viewfinder for, you know, you can change anamorphic squeeze on that camera, and you can, you know, crop it to different aspect ratios. So even as a viewfinder on set for lining up shots, it's particularly useful. But just as a film camera, in the link there'll be a YouTube video to a feature film that they shot in Japan called Sinsin, using that camera. And obviously, like with all of these stills cameras, they require tons of accessories, right? So there's, again, the market for all of these things. And one of the things that I noticed that Tilter has made for the Canon R5 is a cooling block that goes on where the LED like folds out. You put this fan that slides into the cooling block so it can cool the camera down, which is great, but I just feel that's kind of like a design flaw, right? Like, don't you think? What do you think, Alex?
No, when I saw it, I mean, so overheating cameras is something that a lot of us have to deal with. I mean, that has been, you know, so there's part of me that goes, well, you know, maybe it's not needed all the time. I mean, I know that we built, like for our Ozos as an example, we had all kinds of fan systems that we built to pull more air through them when we were taking them outside. Do we need it all the time? No. Do we need it in Las Vegas? Yes. You know, and so I don't know what I guess I don't know yet is, do you need to have that fan on all the time? If you're in a studio or if you're in a relatively cool environment, is that necessary? And I don't know that for sure. So the fan may be something that is offsetting the issue of if you're shooting in the desert or if it's over 85 degrees in Cambodia or whatever, then maybe you need that fan, right? So I don't know whether it's something you need all the time or whether it's something you just need in hot environments like this is just managing it. So that's my trying to be understanding about it. I know that not all the cameras are going to work in all environments when you're pushing their processing to the max. And so I think that is I'm trying to be understanding about it because on its face, it seems like a disaster, you know, like for what they did. So that's my nice way of saying, holy smokes, you know, but this is the limitation of trying to fit video into a still camera that I think Canon hasn't figured out as well as others. Yeah. Go ahead, Sky.
I just realized, Chris, because you're going 90 miles an hour and you know all these acronyms and names, and I'm trying to read all of your links and everything without a slide, I'm having a heck of a time trying to keep up. So thank you for taking a breath. B, I want to join your franchise on the C47 clips, and now we're going to Velcro ice packs to cameras. I think you and I got a good franchise going.
Well, and I think that I've had friends, you know, in Mexico shooting where they're taking Red cameras and they literally have ice packs on the cameras. So, you know, this need to cool things down is not necessarily something that is unknown. It's not like this is the first camera that's ever needed to have, you know, cooling, you know, in a situation. And a lot of times for even a lot of our equipment, we like for our Blackmagic switchers and everything else, a lot of it, we tell the clients like 75 degrees. I will admit that some of that's for the crew as well. Like I just don't want my crew working at over 75 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever. So I usually use the equipment as the reason for it. Otherwise they'll say, oh, they'll just have to deal with it. And I'm like, no, let's not have them deal with it.
I've put electric blankets around cameras before.
Yeah. Bill and then Mickey.
Yeah, since I worked most of my career in Scottsdale, Arizona, heat was always an issue. In fact, when the AJA Cyan came out, that's the thing that caused me to say, nah, I'm not so sure, because it had actually an air pass through right next to where the sensor was. And I just realized, oh, that means it's trying to shed heat, and shedding heat in Arizona is a bad idea. It's very hard to do. The other thing, when you said medium format, Chris, it all of a sudden caused me to think, oh my gosh, if it's medium format, that's a lot of pixels. I remember the early days of the Canon DSLRs when they did that first video resolution. Part of that was the Digic processor that was finally able to keep up with a video signal. As these sensor arrays get bigger and bigger, are they able to keep up with the calculations necessary to do good video?
Yeah, they are. There are limitations, however. One of the nice things about that sensor is because it's so big, you can get stabilization on the sensor, so it can do the cropping, and then obviously you can deal with different aspects of, light sensitivity and noise structure and, if you're doing it with 102 megapixels, I mean, those are going to be aimed at photographers doing major billboards and such. But one could, in theory, and it's looking that people will start to do this, you can take a 1.8 anamorphic Cook lens, which is a large format Cook lens, and chuck it on this camera and have an incredibly large format video, because you're taking 1.8 anamorphic and then squeezing it onto this massive 102 megapixel sensor.
With that Fuji, is it downsampling from that down to the 4K? So it does 4K 30, right?
Correct. Yeah,
And
I
so it's
believe
down-
it downsamples. Yeah.
So
I
you'll
believe
also
so.
have incredibly short depth of field, like, a giant sensor. And theoretically, if it's downsampling from that whole sensor, it could be a really interesting, as far as how clean the image could look, could be kind of amazing. If that's the case, it really makes me want to test it. And it really, what I think is smart on Fuji's end is that they've taken a vertical that $10,000 for a 100 megapixel camera is a deal. Like it's to, for, that type of thing. So I think it's a great way to stay inside the professional market in a way that, and not have to compete head to head with everything else that's happening. Sky? Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, we lost Sky.
Yep, we lost you, Sky. Oh, there you go. No, yeah, we still don't hear you. All right, next question, Chris. I don't know what happened.
I was just going to say, I'm a bit of a Sony fanboy, so I admit that up front because I do shoot. But have you guys seen Gerald Undunn's review or preview of the A7S III? It's phenomenal sounding. It's only 4K, but it's at 120p and 422 10-bit and no overheating and unlimited video recording time and
ISO of 400,000, I think. 400 and something thousand. Yeah, I mean, well, we don't know what that looks like at that ISO, but I think that I do like the fact that they, again, what we're seeing is a vertical where they're not racing after everybody else. They're finding a niche that doesn't, so 12 megapixel and full frame, really, really good low light, and refining that rather than going, chasing it. And they have other ones that chase after the pixels, so they don't, they have another body mount that goes after, that goes after pixels. And so they don't need to do it here. Go ahead, Chris. What were you going to say?
Fascinating.
Chris Summers.
Bill wanted to say something, and then I'll chime in.
Well, it was just about that. I got a test unit of the very first Sony A7 thing with a group of photographers, and we went out into the Superstition Mountains, and it was during a big storm in Phoenix, and literally you could not see your hand in front of your face. There was cloud cover, there was no moonlight, there was nothing. It was pitch dark. And on that first A7, cranking it up, I was able to get astonishing pictures of the mountain range in front of me. And so that Sony research into gaining up cleanly is astonishing. I was not thrilled with the physical qualities of the camera. It did not handle well for me. I thought it was just a little too slabby. And you know how a good Canon DSLR, or there are other brands too, just it fits in your hand right. You can kind of carry it, and it just feels right. That didn't. I hope they've come forward, but those are the kind of things that day after day, if you're shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, you get to know your camera's physicality. And I'm a pretty big proponent of that.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, one of the things that I loved shooting with the Lumix GH5S is its quality was just phenomenal in terms of the actual pixels and what we were able to get in terms of dynamic range, in terms of what the camera produced as a final end result. I don't care about more pixels if my goal is 4K video, and you want to have the best low light performance and the best dynamic range. And it seems that Sony has grabbed onto that same success with the A7S III. And I haven't had my hands on that camera yet, but just by their methodology, I think that they are just gonna eat everybody else's lunch in terms of Canon and Nikon and anybody else trying to do video.
Mickey and then Chris.
Yeah. For such a long time, at least the circles that I work with, they really love the low light capability of the A7 range, but they can't seriously consider it because of the bit rate that it shoots at. But stepping up to 10-bit is like a big deal. It's a big deal. Like people are now can actually use it on bigger productions because of the image quality that it records.
Yep, Chris.
Yeah, with all the considerations with all these cameras we're discussing today, ignoring optics and lenses for a moment, but the main considerations for me personally would be like the sensor, what Mickey was saying. You sound great, Sky. And the other thing would be, recording. If you were recording on the camera with internal media versus off-board recording using an Atomos or something, that would affect your power consumption, it would affect your heat, it would affect how long you can record for. So one would have to look at all those factors when investigating all these camera bodies for what your use would be.
And I used a A7S II in Iraq with a Pixie 5 with XLR inputs, for interviews. And I thought that mix, so taking the output from the camera going to the Pixie 5, then I've got really nice preamps, going into it for the mics. And it all fit into a nice little 1510 that I could throw in the back of the, like it was all pretty well contained with some small lights and everything else. But I tried to do as much natural shooting as I could for a variety of reasons. Anyway, I found that to be a pretty great, mix of things that was relatively portable. I could shoot with natural light. I could shoot outside. I remember I was in De Hoek, which is, pretty far out of Erbil, and it was 7 o'clock and it was dark and I was still shooting interviews and it looked great. I mean, it's
you mentioned the Pix. Sorry,
Yeah,
Alex, you mentioned the Pix, which is great, and they don't make them anymore, I believe. Like they've ditched it, as we heard from John previously, and the reasons behind that, which is so sad. But I'm wondering what everyone here's thoughts were as to the competitors today. We've got the Odyssey, we've got the Atomos. What are everyone else's thoughts on if you were to get any of these cameras and start doing off-board recording? What would be people's go-to thing?
Anyone specific? Anyway, so Stuart, we'll go to you. I'm not sure if you're answering that question or something else.
I'll answer that one. As a Shogun owner, I probably would not buy an Atomos again. They tend to not finish the firmware. But on the ergonomics on the Sony, I found the same thing as Bill with shooting with it. They're a little funky. But what worries me about those is the low light capability means filmmakers get lazy with their lighting, and you see it in their final quality. Stuff looks like it's not shot properly, not composed properly.
Yep. Mickey?
Yeah, like going back to the discussion on what off-board recorders, contrary to what Stuart was saying, like I'm a big fan of I think I mentioned recently, I'm a big fan of on the display of the Atomos recorders. Yes, the firmwares aren't always completely polished, but sounds like Blackmagic. Comparing the video devices, the PICs, I think so far I haven't seen any other monitor/recorder that has the build quality of the PICs, which I miss those things.
I think it was hard. I think that was a hard decision for them because there's a lot of competition that is less expensive and not enough discerning customers that understood that there was a lot to be said for a really high, well-built, monitor, external monitor. Go ahead, Bill, and then we'll jump to the next question.
Yeah, I've shot with both the Sumo and the Inferno monitors. That big monitor on set, particularly the one that allows you a second backup card reading with the SSDs in the side, has been a comfort to me on locations. First of all, it's a beautiful monitor, so you can really see what your lighting looks like. But also just knowing I have a secondary, even beyond card rollover, a whole separate system where if I can see the picture up there, I'm pretty sure it's going to the cards there, always makes me feel really good.
You were going to say something, Chris Summers?
Yeah, just to come back briefly to ergonomics and cooling. Slumdog Millionaire, when Anthony Dogmantle was shooting that in India, they were using SI2Ks, which are literally just like a sensor in a block with all the cables going out to MacBook Pros, which they had in backpacks, and dry ice packs just to cool everything down. Heaps and heaps of dry ice. So I mean, the cooling thing is a very real problem.
And you don't, and you don't need a hazer, right? I mean,
right?
The hazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just with ergonomics, I mean, it's that's been a problem since digital cameras have, had their democratization day. Everything's kind of front heavy. So, but there are ways to deal with that. There's a lot of companies out there like Small Rig and Tilter that are building cages and shoulder pads and things that you can start to do things. But even without that, I mean, I have spent a massive amount of time getting non-cinema style cameras into a cinema mode, you know, with 19mm rails and base plates and, you know, getting custom blocks machined in a workshop somewhere to get the right height and all the rest. So things can be done, certainly, and it doesn't need to look pretty as long as it feels good in your hand, which I'm sure is what someone like Bill would want.
I feel like we need to at some point go get some of the, I have some friends that were on kind of the early days of video, and it would be fun to, you know, bring them in, you know, Scott Billups and Calvin Roberts and some of these other guys that were really doing these things where they're just, you know, taking big VCRs into the jungle and, you know, like all this stuff to shoot this stuff. I think it'd be a fun hour, is just a little reminiscing about, you know, so that we know how hard what we can do on our phone is pretty amazing. Like we keep on complaining about it, but you know.
Just talking about cooling, Stuart the other day had his Predator mode on the camera when he was flicking on NDI, and it reminded me of a story on Predator when they were shooting in the jungle, and they had an actual thermal camera filming it. And the first day they put it up, everything was just red. Again, dry ice, loads of dry ice on the leaves. They removed everything just before rolling, and that's how you got everything green and blue, and then Predator in the red.
That's interesting. Mickey.
Yeah, I remember dry ice on the not dry ice, but ice packs on the original Mysterium red ones. Like this was back in 2007, 2008, and like I was like, I thought digital was supposed to be easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question, Mr. Fenwick.
TJ Asher says, by the way, the first field recorder I used was an Ampex VPR 20. It was a 1-inch portable reel-to-reel. It weighed 65 pounds. The only reason they called it portable is they put a handle on it. The 1-inch reels were stacked, so it had this very complex reeling thing. 1-inch portable video composite. Can you explain the difference between Super 35 and full frame 35mm, and why Super 35 came about for those who may not be familiar with the difference?
Chris?
Yeah, sure. So let's think of a film camera where the film runs top to bottom. So on a 35mm, your frame size can only be so big. Whereas full frame 35, which you find in a stills camera, is the same 35 but flipped this way. So if you had to fill the maximum frame size, you have more image area on full frame as opposed to Super 35, which is motion picture, and it's flipped vertical as opposed to horizontal. And that's why you get Super 35 versus full frame. Before Super 35, we had regular 35, which was a little bit smaller, and that was to accommodate an audio track.
And there you go. Next question. Oh, go ahead, Sky. You were gonna say something.
I'm testing that I'm back on,
You
and
are.
apparently my audio brag about the battery life of the Rode Go failed. So now we learned something.
See, there you go. A little R&D.
Learned something.
Very good. All right, next question.
And two, that
Oh, go ahead.
that guy is posting the images for the AV of the support for Chris is outrageously helpful. So if you guys want to tag team the See and Say, if Chris and Guy, so thank you. But Chris, if you want to feed him something, I'm all over watching it. Thank you.
I'll build more slides for next time.
Next question.
Nice that you can charge it and use it. Chris,
got a guy to
TJ Asher says, can Chris discuss focus blooming? What is it?
Aberration, I'm guessing, is he talking about?
I don't know. I only have the words in front of me.
Yeah, it's not a definition.
TJ, could
that
you
I've heard.
elaborate? I mean, I'm assuming he's talking about aberration or something like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I believe he might be talking about focus breathing, and I've heard blooming used as another term. And that's basically if you have a lens that's not designed as a cinema lens, typically when you change the focus of the lens, you're also slightly changing the focal length of the lens internally. And when you do that, you're also slightly changing the field of view. And so when you have a lens that is designed for stills, specifically, this is not as much of an issue, but it can be detrimental when you're trying to do cinema work.
And that's something you're familiar with, Chris, as far as focus breathing.
Yeah, you get them even in modern cinema lenses. For example, ultra primes breathe, which is not so great. The more modern lenses, you know, they correct for that. Where literally, as you're racking the focus, the elements are shifting to correct as they travel down from infinity to the short focus.
And one of the things that, from a photogrammetry perspective, that becomes an issue for us because it's slightly changing the focal length and it makes it harder to calculate the position of the camera. And so it's one of the reasons that you try to have such the smallest aperture you can when you're doing photogrammetry, and you try not to change the focus. So you try to get it focused and then stay kind of at a similar distance to your subject. You can't always do that, but that will make it more accurate as far as how it's figuring that out. Go ahead, Stuart.
Chris, is there an anamorphic lens that doesn't breathe?
Master anamorphics. Arri Zeiss master anamorphics are certainly, for my eye currently, the cleanest, sharpest, top to bottom, edge to edge, minimal breathing, color rendition, aberration. I mean, they are very good. The master anamorphics. Yeah.
And where do they start price rise?
Yeah, how many Alexes is that?
Ooh. It depends how many, but I mean, you're talking on the order of between 20 and 40,000 per lens, I think.
Yeah. Welcome to film. And that's not even that bad. I mean, you start there's definitely lenses that we use that you rent them and someone's like, why didn't we just buy that lens? I'm like, because it's $70,000. I'm not going to buy a $70,000 lens. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
But with breathing, I was just going to say grid tests. We've discussed it here so much, and that's an exact reason why we would shoot grid tests. I've often had VFX supervisors, and they'll come and say, okay, put the lens on, rack it from 2 feet, go to 6 feet, go to 10, go to infinity, and then we can see the grid doing this. And then they will obviously take that to the post workflow later.
Right.
So TJ has a follow-up. Why is Super 35 such a standard, and why have we not moved to full 35 for cinema cameras?
Because of the ergonomics, that the film would run the other way. However, you do like VistaVision cameras, it's VistaVision, so it literally does run horizontally, and that is 8 perfs as opposed to 4 perfs, which is Super 35. So a massive frame. But then on a 400-foot mag, you're running 2.5 minutes of runtime before you need to reload. So your magazine on a 1,000-foot cinema camera, you wouldn't fit through a door, essentially. I mean, you'd have trouble.
The camera would look like a crossbow.
From a digital perspective, one of the things you have to take into account when you're shooting is depth of field. And, there's this kind of look that a lot of the full frame folks get used to on YouTube. And when we did it, you get addicted to short depth of field. And so you turn it way up, you open it up and you've got this full frame sensor and everything behind it is just a blur, it could be anything. And you slowly learn to pull that back. But one of the things about that full frame sensor versus Super 35 is being able to manage that depth of field more powerfully. Is that, when a full frame, you're going to end up with short depth of field a lot. It's a lot bigger of a frame. And, we get into situations with full frame where the, one eye is in focus, the other eye is out of focus, or the nose is out of focus. And that becomes more of a challenge with the full frame. And again, like we've tried to shoot corporate with full frame just because, when we were like an event, and you get more than about 20 or 30 feet away and you can't, it becomes an unmanageable problem, in a general environment. So I think part of the Super 35 is managing that depth of field as much as it is from a digital perspective, as much as it is anything else. Go ahead, Chris, and then Stuart.
Just to carry on from TJ's question, I mean, full 35 is a cinema standard now. We've got the Alexa LF, which is large format. We've got the Alexa 65, which is 65 millimeter format. So the digital manufacturers are chasing that large and medium format sensor size. It is happening. And that 35 mm format is still relevant. I mean, Arri's coming out with a Super 35 mm digital camera at some point.
And from a digital perspective, it has we've talked about this before, but it has a huge advantage. That larger sensor is going to give you larger photosites for the same resolution, and that means you're going to get better low light performance. So that larger frame is great. It's why Super 35. I rarely want to use a 2/3 inch, both from a depth of field perspective, but also from a low light perspective. And we go into that typically because we're on long lenses. If I'm using it, it's because there's a long lens involved. Go ahead, Stuart.
There's also the storytelling language. Cinema growers are used to a wider frame with a Super 35 sensor. People watching TikTok want 9:16 and phone sensors. It's the language of the image or the story you're telling.
Yeah. Next question.
Esborn Larson says, so many have down talked the EOS R6 overheating. No one can give me a straight answer whether the Atomos Ninja R5 can fix the overheating issues when connected to the R6. Is this true?
I don't think anyone's had both of them in the same place at the same time in an environment that's required. So I think we'll see more about that, but I don't know if anybody has that info. Go ahead, Bill.
Now, this is kind of a little soapbox thing for me, but what I notice is when a brand new camera comes out, one of the things that distinguishes the chatterati, and I'm among them every once in a while online, is that they love to find something they can be right about that's wrong about the camera. And they blow these things up into a discussion thing and everybody jumps on it. And then you actually get a hold of the camera and you use it for a little bit. And you go, oh, wait a second, this isn't that bad at all. So I sometimes worry. I mean, I know it keeps people from buying cameras, particularly. That's the biggest thing I see online is somebody says, oh, I've heard there's something wrong with this, so I won't go near it. And that stops them from getting the tool and learning whether the tool works for them. And often the time you spend learning it.
That said, when we see, I think that it does help when you see that there could be a major issue to pause, especially with that kind of money, and let it go into the field, let people test it, let people talk about, is it really an issue? And it's not a bad thing. Most cameras coming right out of the gate, unless you have a lot of experience, you should let a bunch of other folks, be in the front line and take the first mini balls. So anyway, let them line up and just sit in the back, and be 3 or 4 rows back is usually a pretty safe thing.
One more little tiny thing, though, is because most of these are fly-by-wire systems, which means the software will iterate. So sometimes you get an early problem, and the next thing you know, the rev in the software has taken care of it. Some things they can't fix that way, but some things are fixable.
But generally on a new model, I would recommend, unless I need it for a job and it has something that I can't replace, I give it 3 to 6 months before I buy a new product, just because I wanted them to get through that firmware issue before I start putting it into production. Don?
Yeah, I was thinking that yesterday I was shooting ProRes RAW on a Ninja V with my Lumix S1H outside, very hot weather. The internal fan didn't turn on at that time. So my guess is that the internal processors don't have to do the encoding. They don't have to do the number crunching. You don't have the memory card controller that's heating up and everything that adds up to heat. Those systems aren't necessarily active. And even if your camera does have a cooling system whatsoever, it requires that less, which means that the EOS R6 or any other similar camera would probably perform better in those scenarios, but it's still just a guess at this point.
Good, Chris.
As an editor, I find cameras to be kind of annoying. And I think a lot of times people want to be known more for being a camera purchaser than a camera operator. I think if you all just relax a little bit, the camera you have today still shoots in color. It still does a bunch of frames. Just calm down. You don't have to buy it the first day. Just relax.
All right, next
Please.
question.
Troy Warrior says, so is a Pocket 4K better for long lenses than a 6K?
I wouldn't. I mean, if you're trying to get more out of it, you will get a little bit more out if you're putting the same lens on that camera. You're going to get a little bit more out of it than you would in the 6K. But the 6K's got more resolution. I mean, theoretically, you could center crop it. If you're doing 6K, you could center crop the 4K, and you get the same. So I think you'd probably get the same thing. I do find that the 6K is going to give you a better lens choice in general than the 4K. The Micro Four Thirds is a great set of lenses, but there's more Canon lenses and better Canon lenses, and it's more interchangeable than the Micro Four Thirds. And the low light performance on the 6K, I believe, is significantly better than the 4K. So if I had the money, I would always, if money was not the issue, I would always pick the 6K, especially now that it's $19.99, even though I paid $2,500, and not that I'm bitter, that it's there, but it was a great deal at $2,500. It's an amazing deal at $19.95. I would probably lean towards the 6K if I had the choice. Bill, and then Chris.
And that also plays into the fact that rental houses, including most of the still camera stores that are still open, have big rental libraries of full frame EF lenses and things like that. So you can go to almost any city and get a long telephoto or some specialty, real small 12, 14, 16 millimeter lenses.
Yep. Chris, Mr. Summers.
Yeah. Guillaume makes a great point in the chat. I mean, I was ignoring that earlier on purpose, though, that we have to think about the lenses and the accessories. I mean, if you're purchasing a camera system, you really need to be looking at the optics, because you're going to be keeping your lenses for a lot longer than your camera bodies down the line. So if you're investing, you need to consider, well, you're going to have lenses that cover full frame. You're going to have lenses that cover large format or medium format. If you're going for 4K with Micro Four Thirds, then I think you're limiting yourself down the road for an investment, I would say.
And I know that part of the reason it was easy for me to make the 6K choice was because I've got a ton of Canon lenses. So so it was easy for me. Like when I'm trying to shoot I'm trying to catch the hummingbirds in my backyard. I have a 1:400 with a 2x on it. It gets really close, and so so I you can get right up there and get a full frame. And so it's hard. The hard part's tracking the hummingbirds, but I will say that is, I would much rather be on a full frame system than a Micro Four Thirds system as I start to buy really good lenses, because I think you're going to want to go to full frame eventually. Go ahead, Chris Fenwick. Oh, Sky, go ahead, Sky, and then we'll go back to questions.
So, Chris, would you call the cameras a computer that we're just sticking lenses onto now? And so, in the early days of laptops and Macs and Windows and processors and all of that, we were all excited about the next new heavy lifting machine. But now, since glass is the golden ticket, in fact, I want to ask Don in Barrie, Ontario, are you using like a 14 millimeter? Because you've got kind of a mini fisheye thing going on there.
Yeah, this is a Logitech 930, so it's the wider angle webcam, and I don't have that much junk behind me, so I just let it be.
Yeah,
I think it's lovely. No, I love the front lighting and back lighting, but back to Chris, sorry. And so back to it's a computer that we're sticking a lens on.
That's been what I've seen since the beginning. Like I was saying with the SI2K camera that, won Anthony his Oscar, that's literally just a sensor block with SDI outs and a power in. When we were doing First They Killed My Father, if anyone was here for that presentation, you'll remember I had that Flare 4K camera setup, which again was just a military sensor, an image sensor, and then you have to do the recording off board. And I mean, most of these camera manufacturers, we just saw it now with Blackmagic. They've gone and made their own sensor from the ground up with their own color science and their own codec, and that's a whole system. We could discuss it a little bit more because I still have questions about the pixel array on that sensor. But yes, it is essentially, just taking electronics and silicon and forming an image out of it.
And stacking and then hiding it underneath a cage and then putting
this is the big thing. And that's the big thing. That was the big thing with me with Red. And this is the thing we're talking about now with ergonomics, with accessories. And I've said it before, like if I hire an Arri Alexa package, I know what I'm getting. I know I'm going to be able to handhold it and put it on my shoulder, and it's going to have the ports in the right place. If I hire a Red camera, I have no idea what's going to be in that box. It could be anything.
And God forbid you find the menu on a Sony camera. It's buried 6 layers deep.
And then there's the engineering menu where you have to hold down the 2 buttons and then push the thing and to get to the one that actually can fix things. And the one that the Sony engineering menu is why I don't rent Sonys from VER.
Or GoPros.
Because if anybody actually knows how to get into it, that it means that they've done things to the black levels or other things that I can't, that they're very hard. You don't undo with a factory reset. Stuart.
On the Sony ENG cameras, hold down. Well, actually, I probably shouldn't explain how to get into that menu.
Don't tell them that.
But
that's why I said the 2 buttons in the thing. I was like, I'm not going to tell them exactly what it is. It's dangerous.
For Sky, a lot of DSLRs are actually an ARM-based processor, system on a chip and what have you. This thing sitting over my shoulder is actually a dual-core Power PC running Linux. And that's
what camera is that?
AJS Scion. That's the AJA Scion, yeah. I thought I'd dress up the background for Chris's show.
Yeah. Very good. Next question.
Charles Hendrickson says, will the Sony HLG HDR video option allow for minimal or no post-processing for shoot and run and gun use?
It depends on your workflow, no?
HLG is just kind of lowest common denominator HDR. That's all I'd say is that it's never going to be great. So, I mean, sure, you can get run and gun. If you're going to do news in HDR, I don't know why you would do that right now, but if you were, then, and for sports that is largely disposable content and it's easier to produce, the HLG format is okay. It is, yeah, you just kind of feel like everybody compromised. I mean, HLG is the YUV of HDR. It really is. It's giving you an SDR and then it's adding more for the HDR, but it's never going to be really high dynamic range. It doesn't have any. It's not going to be custom driven. It's not going to. It's a bridge. I think HDR10 or PQ is going to be is a better. You're going to get more range. You're going to get more control. HDR10 Plus takes on some of the HDR10 Plus is kind of like no one wants to, not no one, but people don't want to pay the Dolby Vision licensing to make that work. But by far the Dolby Vision licensing is the Dolby Vision implementation is the best as far as HDR goes. It's not, I don't think anybody argues with that. It's harder to develop for because it's basically scene by scene, both the in post, they can choose scene by scene control, as well as you can do that where it's analyzing footage on the way through and then putting that out. And it's also taking into account what your monitor is set to on the far end and making adjustments to get the most accurate picture, even for all viewers. And so HLG, I think, would let you do probably run and gun. You could go capture it, but it's just not a great format. Next question.
Victor says, how is time code between the cameras and the sound mixer handled on a big production?
Who wants to jump on that one?
Mickey.
Tentacles.
We're all
Mickey.
looking at Mickey. Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
On productions, on like say film sets and majority of like factual entertainment, the sound mixer generates, typically the mixer generates time code from his mixer, or if the mixer has a dedicated generator, comes from there, so that would be the master. It would come from the sound department. Then we jam a bunch of sync boxes. Like this is the timecode systems ultrasync 1, and then we place these on the camera, and each camera gets a timecode box.
And that's got to, and that. How long will that stay accurate? All day, right? I mean, as far as after it's been jammed.
The current ones, like the current tentacle syncs and like the newer generators, pretty much last all day, but they still jam at the lunch break just in case. The older ones, like the locket boxes from
Ambient
and Denicky, the older ones, stay in sync around. They stay in sync for like around 4 to 6 hours. That's why it's recommended to rejam at lunch, but these should last all day.
Don't we have Ambient Net, the wireless network from Ambient that will reclock it as soon as I bring my camera and I'm in proximity to you, it would reclock it straight away.
The newer units do that. They talk, all the timecode boxes talk to each other, and the ultrasync ones do that as well. Ultrasync timecode systems is the company that used to be called Timecode Buddy. So like they make good stuff.
Courtney.
And also they still use timecode slates in front of the camera, just as a backup, and let you know if any of your sync boxes have stopped working. Or
right. Yeah, it's so much trouble on a film set not to have time code that there's a lot of backups to the backups to the backups, because it really is chaos if you don't have their time code. Next question.
Esborn Larson once again says, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. If I want a hybrid camera to shoot photos and good video, which camera is recommended within a $3,000 range? Or do you recommend just forget photography and get the Blackmagic 6K camera, period?
Such a great question.
Go ahead, Bill.
These are two separate things, still photography and videography. They're both their own disciplines, and you got to do it. But for example, most of these cameras that will output a great still image from a large sensor do not have sync flash or any of the other things necessary to do real high-level photography. Because if I'm not doing corporate headshots, I probably got a system of 3 or 4 strobes that I'm using for background, for key light, for fill light. And when I flip the shutter, it has got to sync precisely to a very small fraction of a second to get the effect I want. And no video camera doing stills that I know of can do that.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I mean, this is a great question, and I actually wanted to discuss it here because it's a little bit of a pet peeve, and I blame the manufacturers for confusing the clients because they are, you know, pushing this idea of this stills camera that can do everything. That's fine, it's marketing, but we have to understand that, you know, the Canon R5 and the R6, they're stills cameras. Look at the body design; it's designed for stills. It's not a motion picture camera. It happens to do motion pictures, happens to do them well. There happens to be a time limit. There happen to be overheating issues because it was designed to do stills. All of these cameras, and that's kind of just a thing to consider.
And I will say that I think that Panasonic and Sony have traveled that better than Canon and Nikon by a long shot. As far Canon got into it early, but I think that Panasonic and Sony have done it with with the A7s and the GH series. I think that they, I see a lot of good footage come out of it. I wouldn't I feel like I've gone past that where I'm mostly video anyway, so I don't really look back. But I think that if I was going to do a duel, I think it'd probably be in those two, Don and then Stuart.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex. I think Sony and Panasonic are great. I've used the Lumix GH5 for video and for stills work, and you're 20 megapixels on the still side. The Lumix S1 is 24 megapixels on the still side, and they've got the full feature set of stills. And they have a fairly good pedigree on the video side. It's not going to be as great as a dedicated video camera.
Right.
So you're going to be in a jack of all trades, master of none scenario. You're going to make compromises on either side, one way or another. But those would be in your price range.
I definitely will say it. I would not buy a Sony or Panasonic still camera if all I was going to do with it is shoot video. That is cray-cray, in my opinion. Like if I'm going to do it as a mix of those two, but I see people do that all the time. Their film rig is a still camera. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so hard. Like that's such a painful way to live, And so anyway, that's my only thing about it. If you're going to if you know that you want to go back to stills, because when I took the Sony, for instance, to Iraq, I was taking stills half the time and taking video half the time, and it was a perfect mix between the two. But I wouldn't, if I was only well, back then I might have taken it because of the low light. That's why we got into this, was low light. Stuart and then Sky.
I'm going to end up throwing the cat amongst the pigeons here. Firstly, that's
such a great one. I don't even know what that means, but it's awesome. I kind of get it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. The only video camera that does stills properly are actually Sony's NEX VG range. The VG 10, 20, and 30 are all a Super 35 sensor. The VG 900 is full frame, and it's actually in its hot shoe. It's got the correct mounts for all the Sony flashes. That's the camera that if you want to buy for doing behind the scenes with interchangeable lenses, it disappears so fast secondhand because the wedding industry grabs it like you wouldn't believe. But the cat amongst the pigeons are all CCDs, CMOS sensors, what have you, that are used in still cameras were originally developed for video. They're a video sensor first. They just happen to do stills as well.
Interesting. Sky?
He's right.
I chose the Lumix for that reason, because it's a Panasonic background, and they actually went across the hall and got some of the broadcast stuff and brought it into the DSLR world. But as to Bill's point, Chris, I'd love you to talk, because I know many a great portrait is now being pulled off of a video feed. So, Bill, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying, the horse and buggy used to be a really good means of transportation too. So
who remembers when, I forget which model of red camera it was, but there was a time when they were doing fashion photography, and it was a fashion shoot, and they literally just pulled the frames out, and that still happens.
And if someone stops, it works well. I think the thing you get into is that it's the shutter speed. Is
the science is different, exactly, as you say.
So that's the shutter speed is the thing where you can't. If you look at, there's actually the most viewed. If you're watching the YouTube one, you can see it in my channel. In the Alex Lindsay channel on YouTube, you'll see my most viewed video was actually the very first video I shot when I bought my Canon Mark II or whatever. I literally tested it, and like, okay, I got video, and then went out and had Tom Anderson show me how he built a margarita maker out of a disposal, from your sink, and a cooler, but what you'll notice in that shot is that I hadn't figured out, literally, it was the first, it was after the 30-second test, it was the first thing I shot with that camera. And you'll see that I didn't really think about the shutter speed. So the frame rate is whatever it is, but there's like, it looks all stuttery because so anyway, it's a different look, but I think that the shutter speed is the one thing that if you're trying to grab stills out of a video, you're at 1/60th of a second oftentimes, or something like it. And so that you're going to get a lot more motion blur that you may not want in your image. Bill?
So for me, the difference is this: my brain entirely changes if I'm shooting video or if I'm shooting stills. When I'm shooting video, my brain is going, okay, how does this shot start? Where does it go? What's my framing when it's where I want it to be? And then how do I end the shot? When I'm shooting stills, it diminishes it to say I'm looking for the perfect moment, but I am looking for a whole different workflow. I am looking to try to perfect a frame. And it's one frame, and I'm going to direct the person who's in it if I have people, or I'm going to direct the camera, continuously tweaking it until I get to that frame and then fire the shutter. I've noticed that even in people in the Annie Leibovitz kind of circumstance, when they've got 4 or 5 people, they're posing them very carefully. They're working toward this and toward this. The best still photographers I've ever worked with take a shot and they say, that's the one. They know, they can see in their mind the frame they've built, the lighting and everything else. And when you go to review the photos, it's not the one before that or the one after that. It is that frame. They are thinking in the moment.
And one of the things about that is that my sister is an extremely talented photographer and of people. And the thing is she's sitting there waiting, and she grabs that image I can take the same image with the same framing, and she got something else out of it that I can't get. So because she's waiting, she's not just taking a picture of them, she's taking a picture of an emotion that's sitting on their face when they had it. And that's an entirely different, and she waits for it. She'll just sit there staring at them, waiting for a moment, and then waiting for that thing, and then grabbing onto it when it's there. Chris, and then Don, and then Chris. Summers, then Don, then Fenwick.
Woman I used to work with, Lynn.
Or not.
I'm sorry. Did I jump?
Yeah, Summers. Yeah, Chris Summers.
Go ahead, Summers.
And then Don, and then Chris, and then Summers, and then Fenwick. Yeah.
I'm so confused.
I yield my time to the man from gentleman from Budapest.
I was just going to say, on the full-size Alexa cameras, they had a hot button, a dedicated button for grab, that you could actually grab a frame and it would download it to the SD card. I mean, it was a great feature, still is, but I think it's still such an underused feature on those professional cameras, because generally on those film sets, we will have a dedicated still photographer. It's maybe separate to the subject, but it's something to consider, that you're dealing with, still photography versus video. You could be stepping on people's toes with unions. I'm not sure how that would relate to some people.
Yeah. Don?
Yeah, Alex, you had mentioned on the podcast that we recorded recently that the value of having 120 frames per second, especially at resolutions like 4K now, is that all of the frame rates of video lower than that are divisible by that number. Mm-hmm. And that can be very valuable if you're trying to shoot stills. I'm kind of paraphrasing you here, but your stills would be more picture perfect in terms of less motion blur, and yet you can still do frame interpolation to rebuild some of that blur into the video in the post-processing workflow. Did I remember that correctly? That's
correct. Yeah, and so you're right, and I think that I don't think we're going to do it all the time that way, because I think the post-processing, it takes a little time, and it's not as perfect as capturing it in real life. So there'll be people who say, I know I want to be 30 frames or 24 or whatever, and I'm going to capture it that way. But I do think that they're to the point that you're making, to the point that I made. Is that I think that I'm going to be experimenting a lot with shooting 120 frames a second for a lot of things. Specifically, one of the tests we want to do is if I shoot something at 120 frames a second and I shoot something at 24, can I reproduce that 24 back in from the 120? Because we have a lot of post-production that will do frame interpolation. So it'll grab onto all the frames in between and rebuild that motion blur relatively accurately, it's not just blurring them together. It's actually looking at the movement of the pixels, and tracking that and then rebuilding the motion blur.
So a follow-up question though, Alex, how expensive is that in terms of dollars and processing power?
The dollars isn't that expensive. A lot of these plugins are relatively inexpensive. The processing power, it just depends on how like at this point, it's a lot of them are pretty heavy GPU or CPU. A lot of them are CPU solutions. But we've done that in computer graphics for a long time, where it's cheaper to render something out without any motion blur, and then you throw it into interpolation and have it figure it all out for you. It has been it saves us time for we don't do it for film, but we do it for commercials and corporate stuff and everything else. So it's something that I'm really interested in, is the idea of being able to just put that motion blur back in. Go ahead, Sky, and then we'll get to their last questions.
Sunshine in Seattle, who knew? So to Bill's point, I think what I'm hearing is we are in photography trying to capture a 60th of a second moment in time. And no?
Not a 60th of a second, maybe a 1/2000th of a second.
Sorry, yes, even more importantly. Yeah, exactly. You're trying to capture that hummingbird wing stop concept versus a video. We're doing in a longer concept, longer time. But the last thing I want to say is I do know many professional photographers that still capture that moment, but still shoot in burst. So
right. Yep. No, absolutely.
Choices on either side.
Yeah, especially the ones that buffer. So you take the photo that you want, and it grabs onto a whole bunch of stuff on either side. Go ahead, Chris. Fenwick.
Victor says a follow-up question to the syncing of the cameras for the 3 cameras. What Mickey showed was $1,200, and he says that's kind of an ouch solution for prosumers. Victor, there's a lot of ways to sync stuff without time code.
You go ahead, Mickey, real quick, and then we'll go to the next question.
There's definitely a lot of ways to sync, like what we were talking about earlier. A slate, a clap. But specifically for Victor's setup, where he's just in one studio doing his saxophone jams. I mentioned in the chat that if he's generating time code from his MixPre, he could just do cable feeds to each camera to feed them time code. Because time code, essentially, you could treat it as if it's a line level audio signal. So there are ways around it. And yeah, of course, slating, we can do that.
Yep. Oh, next question.
Okay. We're now into the negatively voted questions. Stuart says, Hasselblad also do MF video with the rolling shutter being an issue. How does the Fuji compare in that regard?
I would have to check, but I believe they have really modified that camera heavily for video and the video output. They're marketing it as something to be considered in the cinema market.
Interesting. Go ahead, Don.
I do recall that the Fuji medium format is a catch term because there's a lot of different sized medium format sensors. And I do believe, especially for sensors designed for stills, and yes, I know they're all designed for video too. The bigger you are, the more of a rolling shutter you're going to have. And there's lots of tricks to overcompensate for that. On the GFX side, their sensors are a little bit smaller than the Hasselblad sensors. That may lead to some advantage, but I'd have to dig into the weeds to get a proper answer.
Next question.
I would recommend we do this during mic check tomorrow. But Michael Vosbein says, it's great to hear about all the new cameras, but I'd be interested in knowing what cameras you guys are using for simple things like this Zoom video conferencing.
We should add that to our pipeline. Maybe we'll say what kind of camera we're using, and then go into the
maybe
audio,
a little bit of camera lighting, et cetera, et cetera. And then
absolutely.
one last question just came in. Troy Warrior says, are DITs comfortable with all these formats, or does it matter to them?
They have to be. It's what they do. That's why they're there.
Start figured out.
Start complaining about how the camera works. So that was chosen for the show, and this will be your, you won't have very many shows to complain about. Don't
worry, you won't have to worry about it tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Always.
I know DITs that I have known DITs that have been like, I only do red, and they're not really working anymore.
Right. Yeah, and it's an opportunity. Generally I find that every new format or other things, it's stressful, but it's also a new opportunity to really learn it, because you're just if you dig into it, if you embrace it and you're trying to figure out how am I going to take the biggest advantage of that just is one more arrow in your quiver that you don't have to, you're and someone's paying you to figure it out. So I don't usually complain about new pipelines because it usually means that, unless it's putting me at risk, but for the most part, I like new pipelines because it means that someone's paying me to learn how to use that pipeline. So it's useful. All right, we've hit it. I think that the new little we'll work on it, but our new little Mukana telling you what is being answered was kind of fun in the chat. I think that was a good thing. So and what we are seeing is less people in the Zoom and more people in YouTube, which is all good because I think people have figured out how to do both. Go ahead, Chris.
I'd say feature request. I'd love to be able to de-promote something from the host in case I accidentally do it and I can put it in the highlighted area. There's no way to get it out of the host. I could almost drag it over, but
right. Yeah, we'll if you can put that in the Mukana list in Discord, it'll be great.
I will do that.
And Chris is doing 20 or 30 fixes a day, so he's a machine. So there's a whole bunch of things that are getting kind of sorted out from efficiency perspectives and look and feel, and some of the stuff you guys are seeing, and some stuff you won't see. Go ahead, Bill.
There's another tiny little one, but I was just trying to pull off the tab from the host output, the teleprompter output, so that I could see the full and mobile in separate windows, and that's not happening for me. I know this is probably because it's a mobile app.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I don't know. It won't. It won't do that. Yep, Chris.
I got to run. Sorry, I have to duck out. Thank you,
Chris.
everyone.
All right,
see
ya.
Good
to see you, Chris.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot that Chris has an 855 out. We should have set him free. So the anyway. What was I don't know? I lost. Anyway, so thank you very much. We're at 9 o'clock. Definitely, if there are things that you want to have changed inside of the inside of Mukana, the Discord is a great place to do that. Chris Peterson, who's doing it. Another Chris is there watching that stuff and often interacting. So take that into account. And thanks for everybody who came. Thanks. It's again, a show done by all of us. So, and everybody did a great job today. We had plenty of questions. We had plenty of opinions that all matched up together well. And so we'll be back tomorrow to do it again. Mickey, go ahead and hit it. Shauna Canair is going to be here tomorrow, and she'll be talking about her experience of being a videographer. And yeah, and so we'll be there for that. Education Friday and Saturday, so stay tuned for that. And otherwise, we'll see you again. All right, thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Edit Sting.